Can't focus, can't get anything done, can't sleep well, can't see anything the same way since October 7th. All of our lives have been totally upturned by the emotional and painful reality we are facing in the aftermath of the massacre that took place. And we are all looking for ways that we can cope while still staying compassionate to the many needs that need to be addressed, the needs of our people in Israel and our own needs as aching souls, trying to understand how to sustain our hope and address the fatigue that we are feeling. Move beyond being tired and join us for an enlightening conversation with virtual citizens of Israel from around the world who share their personal experiences and insight on how we can cope with compassion fatigue as we live as Jews today. Thank you for joining me for this episode of our Israel Forever podcast. And don't forget to come to israelforever.org and check out all of our incredible programming for virtual citizens of Israel to be able to feel engaged and empowered and to stand with pride wherever you may be in the world. Well, hello. Oh, wow. I'm so excited to have all these beautiful faces. It's nice to meet you. It's nice to have you with us tonight. You can hear our fighter jets up above, perhaps in the background, as I speak to you here from the Judean Mountains, a moshav called Nes Harim, where I live. I'm Elana Heideman, and I'm so honored to have you join me for tonight's conversation. Thank you. We're continuously getting new people joining us. So in the meantime, please do continue to introduce yourselves too. Teaneck, New Jersey, San Jose, California, Edmonds, Washington, Rockville, Maryland, Dallas, Philadelphia. We've got all the corners of the world coming together here. Fantastic. It is wonderful to have you on this very special occasion. We are all overwhelmed with so many different elements of life that sometimes it's hard to keep track of all the webinars and all the opportunities. And I wanted to be able to create a experience that would be a personal encounter, even though it is virtual, a way that we could come together and address some issues that we're all coping with, because compassion is actually one of the things that we're made up of as a people. And the feeling of family connection has always been a part of how we as a nation spread across the world have survived the generational targeting of Jews. So we are coming together tonight as a way of helping one another and hearing one another. And that's something that we inherit even from the generations before us, helping one another, whether it was fighting the Greeks, the Romans, the Babylonians, the Persians, hiding in Spain, or the barracks of extermination camps, helping in the fields of Nova, helping to reach the kibbutzim on fire. The acts of chesed and kindness are really a demonstration of the thread of ancestry, heritage, community, family, obligation to one another, Kol Yisrael Aravim Ze B'Ze, that we share. The eternal love of the Jewish people for an eternal people in our eternal homeland. It's just always been a part of our identity. And that's what helps us feel so much compassion for one another. So I'm continuing to let people join us here as a part of this global conversation so that we can explore what that compassion means, how we are coping, what are the tools that we are finding that help us in what we're facing, who are some of the personalities out there who have been able to inspire us, because those are expressions and those are role models that can teach us more about what we can be doing to be stronger together. It's a phrase we often use. And now we have a chance to look at how we're coping as compassionate individuals and how we are helping each other to sustain the strength to overcome the fatigue that comes with it. The infiltration of Israel's borders on October 7th, it violated everything that we hold holy: family, community, human dignity, children's innocence, Shabbat, Torah, Simcha, hope, peace. The event not only challenged the resilience of Israel and Israelis, it sent shockwaves across the globe and exposed a landscape of terror that's showing its face in our streets and in everyday lives. It is fast redefining the role of our Jewish historical existence, what that means to each one of us, and how do we add that in our home life? How do we express that in our work life? How do we feel like we have to keep hiding? We are facing certain realities about the importance of belonging, compassion, and empathy. And this vicarious trauma is felt even by many who didn't directly experience the massacre or even loss on October 7th. But this connection, the idea that a Jew suffers hate in one place in the world and we feel it, an attack on one Jewish community is an attack on us all. As a result, many of us, we're still living in survival mode. Our hearts are tired, our brains malfunctioning, our anxieties are heightened, our fears are on fire. The victims, children, women, elderly, men of all ages, all origins and faiths, different nationalities, I mean, a real reflection of Israel's rich and diverse society. The voices and stories of the survivors, well, they give us a little bit of that humanity, and they give us the opportunity to really identify with their experience, their feelings of being victimized, and their feelings of recovery. So the bravery that it takes them to recount these horrors, it's also hard for us to fathom, because we're also faced with, how do we recount them onward? How are we a part of the transmission of memory? We've done it for decades, inheriting being witnesses to the Holocaust, but how will we now do that as the vicarious witnesses of October 7th? But it's our obligation not only to hear the stories, but to think, how can we incorporate this into our compassionate hearts without our hearts bursting at the seams? Because that's how it feels when we wake up in the morning, and maybe those of us who are moms, I know I feel it very intensely as I look at my children. I'm sure every parent, and we feel we have to make a space for ourselves to be able to cope, build the strength. And when the story scrolls continue, because we feel the obligation, the thirst for every word, every meme, it's a form of coping, because we know that we want to hear, we want to know the details. And if we miss something, have we not heard this news piece? This is a little bit of helping us stay sane. We can compartmentalize, we can break it into facts. We can feel like we're making a difference. We can understand reality, the miracles, the losses. All around us, even amongst good friends, though, people are taking less interest. They are not hearing the Jewish story that is deserving of that compassion. They are, as we once heard about the Holocaust, sick of the Jews in their gas chambers. They're tired of it. And they aren't interested to hear our pleas for the release of our innocent hostages and our babies and our women and our men. And they aren't interested in understanding the basis of a just war fought to save humanity from the threat that Hamas represents for everyone. Israel is just a first step. What are they saying? October 7th is a rehearsal. And families in Israel are divided, with soldiers on the battlefield facing guerrilla fighters designed as civilians. So, of course, part of the rhetoric that we hear of how many civilians are being killed dominates the facts that the smallest percentage of civilian deaths is taking place at this time. And genocide is nothing more than an attempt, or claiming that the war is a genocide is nothing more than an attempt to dehumanize Jews further and to minimize the reality that was the Holocaust. But we have 60,000 displaced evacuees from the various borders who are still under missile fire, and all of Israel is at risk from infiltration, or attack by, well, teenage terrorists, frankly, innocent civilians. Our struggling economy, our education systems, our medical care, the collective trauma, and the mourning of an entire country weighs on us. And yet, as the nation of Israel, mourning is not a luxury that we can afford. We live our lives with it every day. We're fighting a battle of public and private opinions that have become downright evil in intent and based on empty lies, so logical that there is little that the common person feels they can do to counter it. And yet, wow, have you seen the voices of people out there attempting to do so? I'm amazed by some of these new voices, new faces, new ideas, and new words being put out to help empower one another, to help us strengthen the compassion we share in ourselves. Because while the compassion for Gazans is fueled by these lies, mechanisms in place, spread propaganda to demonize Israel and Jews in every way possible, a lot of Jews are questioning their identity, their politics, their friends, their home. Silence of many is deafening, and the indifference is astounding. The implications, even more dangerous. Either one stands with Israel and the Jewish people, or one is literally siding with rapists, murderers, a general society of accomplices who trade the heads of dead Israelis as a prize. There is a greater divide in humanity now than perhaps ever before, and we are seeing the writing on the wall. So we're forced to reassess what it means to be alive in a time when people are calling for your death again and again. And as one lovely chant has been heard, October 7th again and again in every Jewish home, on every Jewish head. The international community is facing a moral blindness that many are getting caught up with because it's been bubbling under the surface for decades, and now it's rearing its ugly head in front of our eyes. So we have to learn from the experiences of our elders and our ancestors, and we have to face these challenges as they arise. Survival, coping, and yes, even compassion fatigue, onward to thriving. Because this is what has enabled our survival for these thousands of years. We're living in a time where our compassion requires us to attend to our aching hearts continuously. Our desire to feel more, to do more, is countered by the need for self-care, the questioning of the future, the ways to find hope through the pain. We are living in a time where Jews everywhere around the world now have to be careful what we say, who we talk to, vetting teachers and physicians, I learn, fellow Jews who have been led to believe the lies about Israel and our war for survival. We have to vet our friends. We have to vet our words. We have to figure out how to also talk to our friends who are in the other side of the world. So Israelis, diaspora Jews, making sure we're talking to each other more, that we're sharing in this experience. And that is why we come together through Israel Forever, as a way to open a conversation, to be able to learn from each other. Because many of us, we can't focus, we can't get things done as easily, our creativity is stifled, we might not be able to sleep well, maybe we can't even see things the right way, the same way, because every tiny thing is a trigger. Our loving hearts are exploding, and all around us we feel the crushing weight of fatigue over Jewish suffering. Those who are willing to hear our companions in this battle for Jewish freedom and human rights, those who might feel the impact of the complete callousness and carelessness of many in the world, only when it comes to Jews in Israel. There is a double standard that unites all the haters against us, and there needs to be something that's uniting us. So let us start with our compassionate heart. Whatever their reason for hating, we have to have the same reason for coming together and saying we can learn from each other. So for tonight, we invite you to share your compassion, to share the struggles you're facing and holding strong, to share your advice. Some really great voices I see have also joined us, people who I have followed and who I've heard for all of these 5 months, making an impact with their voice in some way and helping to empower others, how can we stay strong? How can we fight the fatigue we feel? And how can we really give each other some advice, whether in America, London, Paris, Toronto, Australia, Johannesburg? We got to understand the root of the spread of hate, but we also have to understand the root of Jewish survival. And that comes from people like yourselves joining me tonight. So thank you so much for joining me for this special evening. Uh, Hello, and look at all of these again. I'm seeing more and more people. West Bloomfield, Michigan has joined us. Share with us your questions, your thoughts. What have you been feeling and thinking and wanting to talk about from your corner of the world?
I was
I
gonna put this in
want
the chat.
I
But as
Jessica, oh, I'm so glad to see you. Thank you
Hi.
so much for joining us.
I'm so excited to be
Wonderful.
here. I'm gonna cry. I honestly feel like this is everything I've been needing, and I'm so happy to be here. As you were talking, I actually received a really intimidating message from the owner of my practice that I work at. I'm a therapist, saying that she had been contacted by a social worker saying that I have trouble in content and like all this stuff. So I actually just received that while you were talking. And I'm wondering how if other people are having this struggle of I don't know how many other people in here are from helping fields, but I that's so scary. I'm pretty scared about it. And I guess I don't want to talk too much. I so for those of you who maybe aren't in helping fields, I don't really know what the qualifications were for this group, but I'm a therapist, and my social media has been aimed at giving just support to people struggling with anti-Semitism right now, and all that comes with that: compassion, fatigue, fear, anxiety, all the things. So I'm feeling very scared right now about this phone call I have after this, and I wonder if anybody else has dealt with this. I don't know if this is the proper avenue for that.
Yes, of course. It's exactly the reason why as I said at the beginning, for those of you who didn't join, I'm Elana Heideman, and I'm the CEO and the executive director of Israel Forever. And I come from a lifelong commitment to Holocaust memory transmission and education. I am a historian and a psychologist with expertise in atrocity memory and phenomenology. And I think that very often we are watching so much information come across us and we are not being given access to processing methods. So why has it taken me 5 months to finally get into this? Because I needed that time for myself as well. And we're all coping. And yet, while we're coping, that hate is rising. And Jessica, this is the perfect avenue where you would share that. Does anybody want? You can raise your hand. You can just pop your microphone on. I intentionally am holding these virtual salons as a way for open discussion as a community, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to feel that we walk away with something more than just a frontal presentation. That's not what we need anymore. We need the tools, we need the resources, and that is what I've been building at Israel Forever. I do have some thoughts for you, Jessica, but let's see if there's anybody else out there who might be dealing in a helping field, a healing field, who might have something they want to offer. Have you faced this kind of hate in your workplace? So I'm going to jump in then, and I'm going to tell you that first of all, there are legal actions that you probably could take prior to making your next phone call. You might want to consult in your local community. See, I am sure right now in most Jewish communities that there are enclaves of professionals who are looking on combating anti-Semitism, and they will tell you how you can report it, because that is absolute discrimination, especially if the reporter of you is somebody who is possibly a supporter of the alternate side. And it's a terrible phrase to use because, nobody asked for the alternate side during the Holocaust or 9/11, but this is the world we're living in today. And I wish you a lot of strength with that. How do you cope with that fear, Jessica? Just I'm going to hold on to you for a second because I'm so love what you do with your passion and the way that um it's no holds barred, and you're in a physician's world, right? You have Physicians Against Anti-Semitism. Is that the name of the other group? Trying to get strength
I'm
in
not,
numbers.
I work with them. I'm not
Uh-huh.
them. I know that they have a psychologist, or I can't remember if she's a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and
Uh-huh.
I believe two physicians.
Yeah. It's really an important effort to bring voices together. Have you found it helpful to you? Did anybody there mention anything about being targeted professionally?
So actually, what I've come to learn from looking at all of this in the last 20 minutes is that this particular social worker was kind of, I guess, trolling my social media, and then Physicians Against Anti-Semitism posted it, screenshotted it to say like, this is the kind of stuff we're dealing with. And so I guess this social worker is retaliating by researching me and finding my practice and research and reaching out to my um, but if your question was, have I found it helpful? I have found it so helpful. I think that especially
Yes.
since my practice went completely virtual during COVID and just never looked back, it has been very isolating. I don't know if anybody else is dealing with that, but I would imagine you are. Just kind of this virtual nightmare. Um, and we're only a few people, and uh, social media is just rampant with anti-Semitism and anti-Israel, and just it's unchecked, it's scary, it's uneducated, and all of those things. Um, and I really felt like I was kind of alone, especially since my field and my city is really having struggles. I mean, last night at City Hall, it was deemed a no safe zone for Jews, because they had, I forget what they called it, but basically they brought out strobe lights and noise frequencies that were designed to confuse the public and police, for a pro-Palestine. It was called Chaos for Palestine or something. So it's been really scary. So uh, I'm in Philadelphia. So having this kind of professional networking with other Jews has been so healing, so validating, and professionally very helpful. I mean, that sounds weird and gross to say in a lot of ways, that I've grown professionally since the seventh, but it's also really meaningful and it's true. So I've really loved it.
I think sometimes the challenge that we're faced with, because it's such a identity check, what we're going through now, I think that the challenge forces us in one direction or another. And actually, it's not bad to say that you have grown in a direction as a result. I actually wonder if that's part of our resolve as a people, the idea that we have to take every catastrophe and we have to move forward in some way, having learned a lesson from it. So that lesson is to drive you forward. I will tell you, by the way, that for reporting on social media becomes even more important. And there are mechanisms in place. I know, if you haven't heard of them, Cyberwell, which was started by a young woman who just created a mechanism so that platforms would be forced to be held accountable for anti-Semitic content, but it also requires that ongoing reporting. However, any of you who are ever on social media know it's exhausting to to have to report all the time and to have to ban and block, and then to it infiltrates your soul when you see this. I mean, it's soul sucking when you see the kinds of things that people are writing, and it wears us down. I don't know if what is the answer, to keep trying to target them, or is it to ignore it like white noise? How can we mitigate its impact on how we're feeling and our ability to outlast this level of survival mode? Let's hear if
Uh,
anybody has,
Ilana,
let's hear if
uh,
anybody has any
Ilana, it's
other
Debbie.
comments. Yes. Debbie, yes, go ahead,
Uh,
Debbie.
Hi, everyone. I
Hi.
actually work for Ilana. So I was an activist for many years and pro-Israel activist. And one of the things that really helped me to deal with the um, intransigence and hatred of the other side was to build an agenda, my own agenda. And the more facts I garnered and held under my belt as a way to that I didn't mind what anybody else said. I simply built my own agenda. And whenever I was confronted, I used my own agenda. And because I became so strong in it, it enabled me to overcome the hate and face off people if I needed to face them off, because you cannot counter everything they say to you, which are, we know, are mostly lies. But if you come back with your own agenda, it's very strengthening. That's just one bit of advice I felt I wanted to give in Jessica in this instance. And so that was my part of it. Yeah.
Who else would like to share? I do think that it's important to have the agenda, but more to have it come from, there are lots of people who are involved in advocacy. And I think that that's amazing for the people who have the strength to do it. A lot of the people who turn to me privately for some guidance and assistance are people who are really not wanting to be public. They don't feel that they're capable of being advocates, and they're just simply trying to learn how they can make some sort of a small difference so that they don't feel so helpless. How about anybody else out there? What are the kinds of ways that you've found, and whether it's through online advocacy or local activism or some personal empowerment, how are you coping with the compassion and how are you fighting the fatigue?
I
Hi,
am
Elena.
Oh,
Elena, hi. I'm
Ilana,
Julie.
yes. Hi,
Alana, can you
Julie.
hear? Hi.
Ilana, yes.
Elana. I'm sorry I'm not showing my picture. It's a little bit early here on a Sunday morning, and I do want to just say that so I'm actually a photographer, and I'm pretty active on social media. I just love sharing my photography, and actually from October 7th on, I've been, focused so much on social media, and I was, uh, uh, as everybody was horrified and stunned, and it's just like a roller coaster for months, and now it's going into another month, and day by day, and I just for me personally, I was heavily involved with looking at things and sharing things, and what my advocacy. I'm not a professional in any other psychological way or anything, but for myself, I found it to be a way that I could, well, take in information and then also share it according to my own editing of myself. So, and when I became overwhelmed, I self-controlled time on social media on my phone. I process things, too much in some cases. I've started to follow so many people. It's like folks it's just been kind of amazing in so many good ways. Michael Rappaport comes to mind. He sort of uses a lot of curse words and such, and it's like other people that people have seen. I mean, Michael has said things that I say under my breath, but and just all the activism that has blossomed and come forth in people wanting to contribute. So what I've done in my own personal way, in my own little self-contained world here in the Seattle area, and to be quite honest, I live in a suburb here, and very few Jews. I mean, there's probably 3.7 Jews here in our little area. Seattle is quite different, about 20 miles from where I live, where there's protests. Freeways were shut down. You might have seen that on the news. So I have wanted to beam myself to New York and be in a parade of Jews and actively, shout out to the world, but I'm not there. So I have used social media as a way to see, to share, and to stay informed as well. So I've learned so much about what's going on day to day. When it becomes too much in terms of the content of this call today, I have stepped away. I've not looked at my phone. I've become troubled immediately. It is quite emotional to take in this stuff visually. I'm really a visual person. And so I've just tried to limit the amount of time that I spend, but also use it as a way to learn and also give. So when I share, mostly in stories, it's a way for me to give something. So I feel like I'm contributing, and it's been difficult. I share a lot with my husband, and say, look at this, look at this, look at this. He kind of doesn't want to, he doesn't, it's almost too much for him, but it's been a way for me. And so I just say for myself, I've tried to take care of myself by going on and off, but also being inspired and empowered by the voices that I see. For instance, the Oscar thing. I watched that film, Zone of Interest, prior to the Oscars. I know I'm going on and on, but anyway, just to say that it's been helpful for me to have something to do, and then also to care for myself when it becomes too much.
I think that's an important balance. And thank you for bringing up those different instances, because I know that in certain areas around the world, and different areas in America, you don't have the same reality in terms of the physical threat, but social media is a threat that infiltrates everyone's life. It's infiltrating the life of our teenagers and our kids who don't know how to navigate. And then if it gets played in a home, then even younger children who are being exposed through these new anti-Semitic education systems that are becoming the norm in many public spaces throughout the United States, less so in Europe. But in Europe, there is the foundations of traditional anti-Semitism and the history that of anti-Semitic behaviors from the past, Holocaust not only, other decades as well of massive attacks on Jewish communities. One of the things that we share in our Israel Forever Ambassadors group is history on this day, for example, other events that have happened in history on this day, as a reminder that October 7th is what we're living in. But this is something that we can also share with the longevity of the Jewish experience of suffering that we have inherited. And anyone who works with any type of trauma care, even for each of us, we deal with this intergenerational passing of the trauma that then got awakened by October 7th. But we're finding ourselves in such a different situation because of social media. Because social media makes the threat so present in our minds, if all we're doing, even if we're scrolling by ourselves, it creates a trigger, a paranoia on many different things. Finding the self-control you mentioned, Julie, I think is very hard for people. Self-control on social media means that you are going to maybe miss out on something. You're not going to hear the right voice. You're not going to share the right post, right? We have this need to keep it going. And again, what's the price we pay on our survival mode in our bodies? Fatigue, emotional fatigue, mental fatigue. Maybe we're more annoyed with the people in our lives because we're so worried about fighting the battles with the people who shouldn't be in our lives or who are threatening our lives. To what extent do we actually have to engage? And how do we implement those systems of self-control? Jessica, I saw something you shared, which emphasizes getting out and having exercise. Absolutely, these are crucial things. But we also say to ourselves, if I couldn't function and try to fit that in when I wasn't living in Jewish survival mode, how can I manage it now? Sometimes if I have 5 minutes to myself, I want to be able to get in my few extra minutes of Pilates, but I also am exhausted. I'm exhausted. And I'm in Israel. So again, I don't know who here is in Israel with me and who is not. But this is such a beautiful opportunity for us to be sharing, because this is what it means to be Am Yisrael and our friends of Israel who are standing by our rights to get through this and to thrive. And that's the goal of learning these coping mechanisms. So I saw a hand raised, Lori. Yes, Lori, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm Lori. Excuse me.
Hi. Oh, and thank you
Yeah,
for your patience. I saw you earlier. Try to
no
jump in.
problem. No problem. I recently returned from a mission where we were harvesting fruits and vegetables, picking them, packing them, and all that kind of thing. And we went around the room when we first started, and the question of why you're here. And it was because I had to do something. And I think one of the things that's hardest for me is the feeling of powerlessness. And so when I can do something that can kind of offset the anxiety, that helps me. Yeah, and I've had to limit my amount of social media because it'll just overwhelm you. It'll take over your life. Um, and I find myself now that I'm back, I'm finding myself feeling a little bit guilty that I'm kind of taking some space from it. And it's compassion fatigue. It's not that I don't care. It's I'm having compassion fatigue. I remember Rabbi Abraham Twersky one time was on a plane and being interviewed, and a gentleman said to him, you run rehabs and you're pastoral and you do all of these things. You write books and da, da, da. How is it that you have time to pray 3 times a day? And he said, if I didn't pray 3 times a day, I wouldn't have the energy to do all these other things. So I think that there's something to be said there in the self-care thing, that if I don't take the time to exercise, there's so much nervous energy and other stuff in there. Excuse me, then I don't have the energy to do the good stuff. I've been very fortunate that I haven't really encountered a lot of people being aligned with the terrorists. And I can block people, I can stop following people, and that doesn't really solve it. But I'm also finding if I counter, it's not getting anywhere anyhow. Because if somebody's got these firm beliefs, my saying something isn't gonna change them. In any case, I'm glad we've got a place for support, and I'm really interested in hearing what other people are doing for their compassion fatigue.
Well, first, I'd love to commend you on coming to Israel. The volunteering spirit here in the homeland is absolutely mind-blowing. It is amazing to see our people coming together. And I have the great privilege of interviewing Yocheved Kim Rottenberg and Hagit Greenberg, who put together Swords of Iron volunteer opportunities. And we're going to be featuring our special discussion that we shared on volunteerism in Jewish life later on in another discussion. But the feeling of touching the trees and picking and helping in the soil and meeting the Israelis that are there on the ground, I think that is also something you mentioned, that to beat the powerlessness is you have the power to conquer the land, almost in the spirit of the pioneers who had gone and turned the desert and made it bloom right there in the Negev in in the early 1900s. And then later on, as the years pass, and you were there a part of that building effort. So I just want to say, Lori, anybody else who has been here volunteering, kol hakavod, and spread the message elsewhere that others can volunteer. And remember, there are also ways that you can volunteer even from a distance. And if you're looking for new ideas, you should reach out to us at Israel Forever, because we are chock full of ways that you can make a difference in challenging times, even if you cannot get to Israel. Lori, I bet that being here amongst the Israeli spirit, because there is a very unique Israeli spirit here, I think that probably gave you some strength to go back. But when you go back, you're also living in the diaspora, forced to live with a dual identity of this. Now you're just watching the news. You're not feeling the air on your skin. You're not hearing the Hebrew in your ears. So you have this distance, and in that distance, you're also wanting to create space for yourself, and it's easy to actually turn it off. And then that's another luxury that, by the way, Israelis don't have. We can't turn it off. There's no turning it off. And then there are, by the way, also people who want to turn it more on from the diaspora. And I will encourage you to, there's Radio Israel app that you can download. You can listen to Galgalatz. You can stay, even if you don't understand the Hebrew, let it thirst into your ears. Ways that help you awaken a source of spiritual energy as a Jew. Now, Lori, you mentioned one other thing, prayer. Prayer doesn't speak to everybody in the same way, but maybe now, post October 7th, we are seeing an awakening in prayer and the beauty and the appreciation of the beauty of prayer and why it's been passed down. Some of the songs we sing for over 2,000 years from the times of the temple, and we know those tunes, and we know that the Kohanim, so even non-observant Jews are suddenly like, wait, how do I get closer to this? And there are ways to do that as well. Learning new prayers is a great source of helping ease compassion. There is a certain psalm of Tehillim, that a parak of Tehillim, that I find so empowering because it talks about how we were caught in the teeth of the snake, and without God, we would have been swallowed alive. And for those of you who do keep up on some of the memes and the facts and the calculations going around, there was another party. People who haven't heard about it. And had they reached that party in the surrounding communities, then within an additional 8 to 10 hours, there would have been nearly 250,000 Israelis who would have been murdered. That would have been the equivalent, if I understand the numbers correctly, and I'm not going to play a numbers game, but of over 1 million Americans within 24 hours. But in Israel, we have the IDF. And they help us here in Israel feel compassion, right? Because we have compassion for those soldiers and their families and the families of the fallen. And here is again another divide between Lori's experience of being in Israel, going back to the diaspora, and those of you who maybe haven't had a chance to come here and long to a connection, because that connection is what's helping you overcome the fatigue. So Ian, let's hear, what do you have to share with us today? Thank you
Hi.
again, Lori.
I'm in the UK, so a strange accent for some of you. I was just listening to the conversation, and I was in the huge march in central London, where I was absolutely gobsmacked that there are 110,000 people marching through London. That was back in October, and I've been to a couple of other smaller demonstrations and vigils that I was able to go to. But, the whole social media thing, what has actually, I'm in commerce, for want of a better way of putting it, what's actually staggered me is the amount of hate on LinkedIn. And that really's thrown me. And I've stopped getting angry at it. I thought there's no point. So what I've started to do, rightly or wrongly, but again, it's my way of looking after me, is to say, where is your call for peace? Where is your call for cooperation? Where is your call for your leaders to recognize the right of Israel to exist within safe and secure borders? All you're doing is hating. All you're doing is calling for my death and death of Israel, my country. And there have been some surprising support for that stance. Clearly all the hate is coming from names that you would think, okay, yeah, you're going to think like that. But that's one way of doing it. There's no point telling them and saying, look, these are the facts, because they don't care. I've just been told they're Zionist lies. So you just counter it by saying, well, look, what about peace? What about talking about this? What about stopping calling for the hate? And that's helped me. And you can see behind me, I very rarely obscure my background on Zoom and Teams calls because I want people to see what's behind me. And again, I've had some surprising positive reactions to that where people have thanked me for, because I probably, just dreadful cliche, you know, I don't have a Jewish name and I don't maybe look particularly Jewish on here. So people aren't sure whether I'm Jewish or not. So therefore, you know, that behind me gives a message. And you're right, Elana, I've not gone shul more often than I used to because I always have gone every 2 or 3 weeks, but I do find it being surrounded by the rabbi and praying has helped also. And our rabbi's sermons down in Brighton have been incredibly good over this period, I have to say. So I don't know if that's
What would
helpful to people or not, but
what would be your advice? Because I know that what's happening in the streets in London is much more severe than in some other places. And Jessica talked about it being more, it sounds like it's like a reporting issue, right?
yeah,
So like you have the
um,
physical threat, you have this, you have a
yeah,
professional threat on your head, Jessica, if I understand what you're sharing.
yeah.
Okay.
I have,
Um,
yeah, I live halfway between London and Brighton. So I go to shul in Brighton, but clearly London's a train ride away. Yeah, we are told that certain parts of London are no-go areas for Jews on a Saturday afternoon. And I tend, you know, I'm in London 3 days a week working. Um, so unless I've got a reason to go in at the weekend, I probably won't. But yeah, you see it on the news, and some of our news outlets are less than supportive, shall we say. And some of them, you could almost listen to them and think, you are inciting racial hatred here, and that is against UK law. If we could coordinate ourselves, we have the campaign against anti-Semitism here.
so it's,
And
but okay, so it sounds to me that like legal response is one form of finding
yeah,
a method of coping, right? Knowing that I can say, um, that knowing that I can go and report something and I can file a claim. And do you guys feel like that's really I'm getting a lot of stories of anti-Semitic incidents that are happening in private spaces, and the people are not willing to report it. Because when they go to report it, they're told basically, and whether this is a attempted rape of a college student or
mm,
an attack in a parking lot of a young professional woman, um, and somebody who is cornered in a closet at her job at a major news network. There are serious incidences, and the people are afraid to lose their jobs, or they're told, but, but Israel, blaming Israel for the rise of anti-Semitism instead of recognizing that
yeah,
what's happening in Israel, it is a war against the Jews. Let's hear from
yes,
somebody else about your experiences, where you're living right now. Where else in the world? I've seen some of these people that you've shared some of your comments here. I'd love to also add, which is about, Susan, you've just shared that you have a sense of despair. No matter how much advocates speak out, it feels to no impact. The larger world is generally silent or very careful about speaking out. And I'm telling you that you are right. And it's only going to get worse. My mentor, Elie Wiesel, always said, it will not look like lists and cattle cars and gas chambers. It will be a different style of attack against Jewish existence. And what started on October 7th, we see now spreading through streets in a way that is almost going out of control. So, Susan, your message is true. It feels like it can't have an impact. The only option we have is to strengthen from within in unique ways. We actually launched a program called Israel Strong, trying to get local communities to work with us to connect network weaving, as I call it, to connect for providing self-defense and self-empowerment programming. Now, Jessica, I see you mentioned you've talked to the Duvdubani unit, and I've been talking with a few others. We have ways that we could get people engaged, virtual citizens of Israel and citizens of Israel who need to come together so that Jews can feel stronger physically and mentally to cope with the kinds of real threats that are not all going to have legal action as an option for consequence, because they will not. You have to have somebody act on their threat, Jessica. They have to actually come and target you because they've reported you. You don't have, you don't have a red mark on your head. But if anybody is unaware, we now know of mapping projects, what was called in Australia a doxing project. They're in all of the different communities throughout the world, mapping Jewish institutions, Jewish homes, of course, Jewish congregations, but Jewish professionals. This isn't, I'm not mentioning it to raise your fears, but rather to say we have to match our compassion with our commitment to action. And Lori, that speaks to what you've said. And each of you, Debbie, even finding your agenda. How can I figure out a way to keep going through the fatigue? When I interviewed Holocaust survivors for years, and I make no comparisons, illegitimate, between October 7th and the Holocaust. You'll hear Israelis, by the way, they'll say, the survivors will say, I survived a Holocaust. That is a misnomer and a use of words. And yes, it fits for them. They survived a catastrophe of burning by fire. There was a home where they found 7 children bound together by barbed wire and lit on fire. This was a version of a Holocaust of Jews. Yes, there were other victims who suffered. Was this a comparison with the Holocaust? No, and we must be careful. We must be very careful. But we can learn from the experiences of those who endured that tragedy of that hell then and say, wait a second, what helps us through that fatigue? Because we aren't suffering a hunger or a thirst or systematic extermination processes implemented over a decade and a half. But we're in the very early phases of the society around us becoming so mechanized that the eventual murder of Jews, and we see it now, eventually October 7th will be another massacre on the long list of massacres. And as Dara Horn has said, people do love dead Jews. So we have to figure out a way to make sure we are preventing more dead Jews for people to love. We have to figure out a way where we could say, I can get through this fatigue, not only of my own, but my children, maybe my siblings who don't necessarily agree with me politically, and maybe before October 7th, they were more progressive, and now they're lost. They are Jews in conflict. Check out our Jews in Conflict resource on the website. I think that you'll find it is usable in any setting, whether it is with family or friends or community groups. But finding these resources is not always easy. And, we're but a small organization, a grassroots effort. And what I love is that we were able to reach so many different people from so many places around the world to talk exactly about these issues. How are you getting through your fatigue? How are you feeling empowered? How can we stop the fatigue of those who maybe say, well, it's a Jewish issue? Because it's not. It's a human issue. Hamas is not an Israel problem. It's a global problem, and it will grow. There's almost no stopping it at this point. So we have to figure out, how can we survive through this wave? Who else would like to share with us today? Tell us where you're from. Tell us what you felt since October 7th. I think sometimes people find it harder to share than they want it to be, right? It's like we don't know if we should say something. We don't know if somebody will identify with how we're feeling or if we'll sound forgive me, but my students have often said, I have a stupid question. And I always say, there's no such thing. Say, there's no such thing right now with the raw emotion that all of us are coping with. I think that was it Phil Levine, you shared here about how self-care is akin to nutrition. We can't live without food for our bodies, but also for our brain and souls. No guilt, simply building muscle to power on. Well, isn't that the Israel strong spirit? We get it from the Torah, we get it from King David. In today, we get it from our soldiers and our wives of soldiers and the mothers and the hostage families. Where are you getting your sources of information and inspiration from that keep you going through the fatigue?
Elena,
Lana,
hi,
yes. Julie.
Alana, I'm sorry. You know, my eyes
That's
are not
okay.
so great and I have my face
Oh,
right
that's
up
okay.
against the
I'm from Louisville,
um
Kentucky originally.
right.
Nobody ever said
Oh,
my name right.
Alana. No, I wanted to ask before, is the recording, I think sometimes when when calls are being recorded, there's a hesitancy. Um, I wondered, is this for just um internal study? You're not going to post the recording, right?
Well, we are going to share this, but in pieces, and
Okay.
it's understandable if there are pieces that don't want, if there's somebody who would not like their personal story shared. But part of our goal is to make sure that our discussions become more broad than even those of us in the Zoom room, so that other people can feel empowered by these discussions. Maybe they couldn't find the time. It's a Sunday, it's a tough time. So, we wanted to be able to do it on a day where people were not at work and they could feel uh, able to discuss. I was in a meeting with a colleague who runs a Jewish school in Europe. She's from Italy. And all of a sudden, she starts speaking in Hebrew and she says, we're going to have to switch languages now because of somebody who just came in the room and I can't talk. And I asked her, are you afraid to speak in Hebrew? And she says, well, they don't really know what Hebrew sounds like, so they don't know it's Hebrew. And that's why I can get away with it. And I thought to myself, we are always hiding ourselves in one way or another in order to be able to talk. And so I want this conversation to be an open space, also open to, as I said, those who for whom it's not convenient to join us live. Jessica, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I'm listening. I love the idea that guilt is a muscle and that the Torah, we have all these teachings around us that tell us not to feel guilt. But I think that to me, that's kind of akin to when somebody has really bad body issues. And then you say, have body positivity. That's so unrealistic. It's kind of like judging a fish on its ability to walk on land. It's going to feel like a failure and you're always going to be disappointed in them, you know? And so you kind of aim toward neutrality. And what I'm struggling with is what is the neutrality here? Because, and so what I'm feeling, and I know a lot of my colleagues and friends are feeling is Jewish friends and colleagues are feeling is this kind, especially as diaspora Jews, we have this privilege, right, of living outside of physical threat to us, unless we're going into a city where it's a no safety zone for Jews or whatever. We have the ability to keep our physical selves safe. And there feels like this really big obligation to be constantly in touch with the phone and social media, feeling the guilt. If you find yourself smiling for a minute, you start thinking, how dare I smile? How dare I enjoy this? And when my brothers and sisters are still being held hostage, or I know that my sister in Tel Aviv is living under rocket fire and had to run to the bomb shelter this morning or whatever. There's this really toxic relationship with guilt where it gives us this sense of control over the situation. And it also, I think, even taking it outside of this that we're all dealing with right now, somebody who's going through the grief of a loved one, they just lost a loved one. There's this thing of, for a while, of I don't want to eat. I don't, or if I'm going to eat, or even on Yom Kippur, if you have to eat because you are somebody whose health requires you to eat, you're not supposed to eat things that are super flavorful or sweet or whatever. It's life. You have to, sustain life, but nothing too outrageous. Um, there's this sense of I don't want to enjoy myself because how dare I? So, yes, we want to combat the guilt, but also a lot of us feel that this guilt is what is tying us to the experience almost. And to give up that guilt feels like a privilege and it feels problematic. And I know that intellectually that is not the case, right? I'm not talking about talking ourselves out of that. I mean, I would call that mental movement. I'm not talking about mental movement. I it's more of this like internal crisis, you know? So yeah, I can talk all I want about how, of course, you shouldn't feel guilty. Go in. Jewish joy is the antidote to hate, and blah 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 blah. That is very easily said, and I think that for those of us who have this kind of internalized guilt system and really, really existential guilt over this, it's not as easily attained. And I would love to hear how anybody else who is kind of suffering with that portion of it, how you guys are kind of combating it at its root.
I've often heard, and I live in Israel now, that they actually, most people who are involved in this and even survivors have said, go and make the most of your life. Live your life as if this is your last day, because they really, if we allow Hamas to take us to that point of feeling this huge guilt, and we can never really experience the awful trauma these people have been through. But what we can do is live life for ourselves and for them. And I think that would be the biggest victory over what Hamas has done to us as a people, that these terrorists, that we have to live life. We have to, that would be a great victory to show happiness and joy and love what we do, enjoy our simchas and enjoy our families and appreciate what we have. That would be a great victory. I think it should be just the opposite if you can.
It's interesting. I wonder if there's a different word that we could conceive of. Maybe it isn't guilt, you know? Maybe if there was I always have used the term pro-Semitism as a not just Jewish pride, but pro-Semitism, pride in our nationhood and our peoplehood. And there needs to be a positive translation of this guilt because there are positive elements of it. It does drive us forward towards action. But I will say that, especially with holidays coming up, there's definitely a big question of how do you celebrate? I went to a wedding of very dear friends, my family, and their son had been in Gaza and they came out for a day. And so all of the friends who were at the wedding were also just out of Gaza for the day for the wedding. And it was this amazing and they were celebrating life and they were saying, we are fighting so that you can live free in our home because nobody can kick us out of here. And they were so filled with this morale and this pride. And for some of those, being there was really tough. How do you balance that? And now Purim is coming up and we're remembering Amalek and remembering the calls for destruction again and again. So I think that part of the answer, Jessica, is to say it's also okay to feel guilty. And that let the guilt be a positive driving force. And again, look for the better, more positive word for it. I'm trying to think of one, can't come up with one off my hand, but I will work together with you to see what can we do to drive it for. I bet there's a Yiddish word. I'm sure there's a Hebrew word. We'll figure it out so that this way people can say, I don't have to feel bad about having this celebration. There's been a few things that have happened that I've uncovered in the education world, for example. Questions of how do you celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut? Now, my mentality is this is the year to celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut. And other people who are faced with internal community challenges are saying, no, 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 we can't celebrate so much. Or I'll be honest with you, there are people taking Yom HaZikaron out of their programming calendar in the communities because supporting Israeli soldiers is divisive. Well, talk about wanting to feel guilty about something. They should be feeling guilty about that. They should be feeling guilty. I heard a rumor that there are communities that are taking out the chapter of the book of Esther, where Esther, the state sentences where she asks the king for the Jews to have permission to take vengeance on the plot to annihilate our people. and they don't want to refer to Jewish defense. So they're taking it out of our history. That they should feel guilty about. For those of us who are suffering the imbalance, Jessica, and everybody, I think it's important that we figure out how to incorporate those around us into a family, community, or friend discussion of things that we wouldn't say otherwise. Somebody in the group here has said, if I knew this was recorded or was going to be shared, I might not have shared, but I want to encourage you to say that's also a way of coping, is to share what you would not normally share in a public space. Giving yourself a space to have a voice is really important empowerment to even deal with smiling on occasion. Because you know, I'll be doing the most simple act, and we remember the people who cannot and the people who are not in their homes. We have been doing a lot of work with displaced families here in Israel, an incredibly therapeutic project that I bet many of you would love. This is our Healing Hearts Mosaic activities, which we're providing for displaced and traumatized families. And even mentioned by Sivan Rahav Meir with the mother of a fallen soldier who was a part of one of our activities, and she speaks about how incredible it was to shatter the ceramic and piece it back together, just like her heart was shattered. And she was able to piece it back together. And when we watch the power of pulling those pieces together, we're really inspired to do more to help that coping be developed as a process, because I don't know if any of us are yet able to process the murder, to process the brutality, the fears that this could happen to any one of us, and to process that fear of guilt. I would say, Jessica, it's not the guilt alone. It's also a fear of feeling guilty. I know people who feel very guilty that they haven't been able to volunteer and they haven't been able to donate and they haven't been able to do more. So I think that that's the coping mechanisms that ease our compassion are something that we can carry on and talk about more with other people. So what do you feel we can do as we move onward? And how can we be a part of it? From Israel Forever to you, your homes, your businesses, your community, finding solutions. Please come and turn to us. We're here to help you, and we welcome you to our community of virtual citizens of Israel all over the world, coming together to feel a little bit more as one people, one nation, one heart, wherever we might be. Before we end today, are there any other comments or questions that you might like to ask? And I agree, by the way, guilt does mean, Jessica, that we are human. So it's very, very important that we humanize our own emotions, have compassion for ourselves, as much as everybody is asking us to have compassion for the other. Let us not ever sacrifice our commitment to the Jewish future, the future of our homeland, the future of our people, and to welcoming one another in the global Jewish family, because that is what we really mean when we say Am Yisrael Chai. You may not realize it, but this is the anniversary today of the birth and death of Moshe Rabbeinu, who his compassion led us to the onset of becoming a nation. And isn't that just an incredible thing that we could be able to carry on in the legacy of our ancestors, to offer compassion for one another, and to make sure that we fulfill the obligation, not only Yisrael, Kol Yisrael Arevim Ze Bazeh, we're obligated one to the other, but also Tikkun Atzmeinu. We're strong enough to say we need the help. We need to come together. And I hope that you'll be able to find some inspiration through the insights that are shared today, and join us in our next program, which is going to be looking at the transition between mourning and memory as we reach the 6 months since October 7th's massacre and the impact it has had on all of our lives. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. Any comments or questions before we go? Jessica, you had your hand? No? Okay. Zahara?
I can't even figure out this thing here. I'm embarrassed. Can you
We
hear
hear
me?
you if you'd like to
Can you
share.
hear?
Yes.
Okay, well, I just want to say something. I've just been listening here. October 5th, I immigrated to Israel when I was 22, and I'm 74, and I have journeyed, and I finally said, if you don't go back, this has been 50 years. I don't get into my history. I showed up in the Israel Center October 5th in Tucson, Arizona, and started my initiation to return. And then we don't want to, well, anyway, this is history. I am sitting in Marana, Arizona. I had no intentions of living in this country ever. And so I'm sitting here and I'm saying, oh my God. So my grief, my sorrow, my empathy, because I consider myself an Israeli citizen, I am living in some kind of, I don't even know. So I'm sitting and looking at all your faces. I'm not a tech person. I don't do social media. I meditate, I pray, I talk, I go talking to strangers. That's the only way I know to remove myself from hatred and fear. I'll go into Walmart, I walk up to a Muslim. It doesn't matter to me. This is how I have to keep my heart open. But I am very isolated where I am. I mean, I'm crying. Just listening to you helps me feel not so alienated and isolated. So I will be contacting you, and I just want to look at the beauty. And somebody stole my mezuzah here, so I'm very empathic with Jessica. There's no way I can prove this, but I do feel I was targeted. So I am just so grateful for what you're doing and all of you. And I would show my face, but I'm not a tech person. So anyway, I
Thank
love
you
you.
so much for sharing. Thank you so much for being here with us. And I think that there's, we all know the concept, the Jewish concept of beshert, that there are people who are just meant to come together at the right time, in the right moment. Even when Mordecai says to Esther, maybe for this moment you were born. It's not just from the Marvel comics or whichever superhero, but it is from our heroes like Esther. That we were meant to come together even after catastrophe to be able to hear one another. So hopefully between those of you who are participants in tonight's program, we'll be able to create direct connections and help you. I encourage you to join our Facebook group for Virtual Citizens of Israel and to follow us on all the different platforms, because the content that we are trying to put out is very different. It's not hasbara per se. And yes, I absolutely agree with those whose agenda is facts and figures and getting it out there. But there are those whose agenda also has to be personal empowerment, personal activism. I work with homeschooling moms and grandmothers. I work with, as a teacher that I've been connected with for years who lives in a tiny town in Minnesota and teaches a Jewish group one Sunday every month. There are ways that we can make an impact in real lives, in real time, and that is why we've been brought together tonight. So I really am appreciative of your joining us from wherever you are. Remember that there are ways we can come together with, as we say at Israel Forever, none of the politics and all of the pride, because it is about pride. It is about saying we will stand up and know that our soldiers are fighting a just war, and our government and our politicians, however we agree or disagree, they're fighting the war for Jewish survival today. And our efforts in our homes and hearts is our survival. How you pass it on. I do have to say, if you're walking up to strangers, that is bravery.
That's how I live.
That is bravery.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
that's
how I.
something that I don't feel we have to face here in Israel. Like
Mm-hmm.
I, I, my parents were just here, Baruch Hashem, and I was asked in a recent interview, where do I think Jews are more afraid? And my father chimed in and he said, in the diaspora.
Mm-hmm.
In the diaspora. Here, yes, we have our fears and we have a war that's on every front. And we have, here, I can tell you, if you can't hear it again, a fighter jet that is going to take out that infrastructure, to not This is no genocide. The numbers don't add up. If you need those facts and figures, you can also contact us, and we're happy to help you find them. But the key is just knowing that we stand with integrity behind the values of being a part of a people that is fighting for its survival, and that we're going to continue to do so, even when we're tired.
This
So
network,
hopefully tonight has
yeah,
given
this
you some strength. Zahara, go ahead.
Yeah, this network that you're creating, because I listen to everybody who's on social media. I have never been on social media and I won't go to social media. I find it very toxic. So, but for me, I have no family. I mean, literally, I have nobody in my life. So what you are doing and the network here of people who have a depth of authenticity and caring, I feel this is going to be a healing and a diversion away from social media. That's really serves to me, very little purpose. It doesn't, there's nothing heartfelt there. And so bless you, dear, bless this group. And I am so looking forward to everything that you're doing, everything, because I know I'm going to be Chabaita. I mean, I have to.
Thank you. I know a lot of people are starting to weigh the question of Aliyah, and it
Mhm.
isn't for everybody. It isn't. And we do need to have a strong diaspora. Jews lived in Poland for 1,000 years of fighting anti-Semitism and facing bloody anti-Semitism, but they survived in the tiny shtetl. I'm actually doing a research now. I'm reading letters that were written between communities after pogroms. And where were they writing? To the Jewish communities who were living in the land of Israel. And they asked, give us advice. So I'm kind of talking to all of you from the heartland of Judea and Samaria. Here, I live in a moshav in our gorgeous home. I'm surrounded by ancient mikvaot and so much history right at my doorstep. But when you're far away, it's much harder to feel it. And so you need the networks and you need the community. And I am going to feature right now, just give another shout out to Jessica Cook, because I follow a lot of different people, and I was really astounded to hear such a young, beautiful Jewish voice emerge, to come out and be so proud and to use your budding experience as an expert in psychology and how to navigate. That's something that can be really inspiring, especially to probably a lot of people who are not getting the support of all the campus activism. Campus students get a lot of budget and support. Well, young professionals don't. And we're trying to use this also, all of our discussions, as a place where young professionals like you can share your insight and can connect with one another. So don't forget to come check out our website, israelforever.org. Become a virtual citizen of Israel. Join us, make suggestions. What do you need? We have more resources than we can even get out marketed on social media. But come and let us know. And if you have something to share, some of your carousels, Jessica, let's feature to this wonderful group of participants who have joined this conversation. I've gone well over my limit of an hour. I think people hate to have conversations that are more than an hour, but this has just been so rich. We haven't gotten a chance to find a stopping point. So I do just want to say my last thank you again to all of you. And may this conversation be the beginning of ongoing conversation. Check out our conversation starters. You need something, we're here for you. And may we all find a way to continue our compassionate heart, because it is our greatest strength. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And stay strong out there.